Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the Johnny James reading series. As you know, this is a monthly reading series, the third Thursday of every month, except for August. And our reader this month is Stephen Behrendt. He's professor of English at the University of Nebraska. And his latest book, The Moment of Explosion, Blake and the Illustration of Milton, published by UNL Press. And he's published his poetry in a large number of places: Nebraska Review, Kansas Quarterly, and Plain Songs, among other places. And Steve.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and do this, and I thank all of you for coming out, or coming in from the heat, as the case may be. I'm going to keep this thing handy because, as you can hear, the combination of allergy and hay fever and everything else has got my voice fairly raw already. So I'll give it a shot. Let me read you a few different things, the first of which is something that I'm very pleased about. It's going to turn up in Sewanee Review one of these days. It's called Bird Point. It was there when we felled the old cottonwood, there, waist-high in a cross-section of the heavy black-banded trunk, arrowhead of black obsidian, buried deep in the heartwood, embraced by the rings and sheaths the years had wrapped around it. Edges fine and flaked with care, tangs whole and sharp. It rested, as in a lined red palm, fragile, alien black stone signing its slow passage eastward, traded from hand to hand, nation to nation, from glass buttes toward the Otoe morning, until a stray shot left it lodged in a young trunk. A chance cut disclosed what had been hid. The tree man saw, an inch this way or that, my splitting maul struck to either side. This pure black point might have lain unseen. The earth keeps her secrets, holding near her heart the points and fractures, stray shots and true, death and silence. We find what we find, wondering. The earth reclaims her own, folding pliant limbs about the fallen fence rows, the homesteads left and lifeless that subside into bindweed and field grass, wrapping her wounds as the oyster does its hurt, by smoothing the sharp and cutting edges with round and secret luminescence. As the frosts and sun consume the boards that framed a home abandoned, as the cottonwood took in this small dark point, embracing and encircling with soft concentric rings its sharp obsidian angles. Those of you who have run into me in hallways or alleyways or wherever know that I've got animals running in and out of a lot of my stuff. Here's another one that's turned up animals in the past. It's called Hidden Cares. Letting the dogs out just before midnight, I saw the possum leave the side yard, not fleeing, merely passing down the fence row away from the dogs, who neither saw nor scented. I like having possums in the neighborhood. Like thinking of them hanging on from garage rafters, curled into wood piles, foraging at night to feed their plain-tailed, hissing babies. Private, retiring lives seldom seen, little thought of, save when I forget to switch on the porch light or take a late-night parcel to the trash. But I worry at the traffic that descends our street. Each fall, the streets are paved with squirrels, incautious, senseless, drunk with gorging on fruit fermenting in the hot September sun, on berries and wild plums, soft, sweet, warm. They rush among the passing wheels, zigzag beneath the cold, unyielding chassis, fall, tumble, roll, and are crushed flat, full tails lifting in the afterdraft. There was another possum years ago when we moved here, a great, round, slow-moving beast. We'd see it before sunrise, returning from its rounds. Moon round and slow, moving in straight and steady line to its daytime roost, it died in pre-dawn traffic. in the silent, gray, half-dark, it must have been. Its body heaped up at the curb like the broken dogs that line country highways, the only sign. It might have been asleep. No blood, no split and separated carcass, broken within, emblem of tranquility, of the graceless, emotionless silence of death. Now this new possum, this new worry, lives beneath another porch, raids another's garden, rattles at midnight another's trash cans. It's good to know there's wild still here, that possums bisect these chartered blocks on routes deep set and ageless as the solstice moon. But I'm back again to scanning curbstones every morning. This next poem is something I've got to read you simply because of a curiosity associated with it. I'm a great one for coming down to campus early in the morning, so I see all kinds of things between about 6 and 7. This is a poem that's going to come out in Kansas Quarterly, and I just got proof copy, galley proofs, a couple of weeks ago, and was horrified. The name of the poem is Transients on the Campus Mall. And the galley proof is perfect except for the title, which has metamorphosed into Transients in the Campus Mail. Really, I was tempted to leave it alone. You see them in the early morning, before the dew has burned off the young grass, before the sun has driven them to the shaded benches that grace the thoroughfares, the malls. You see them in filthy jackets, denim mostly, or heavy quilted affairs desperately out of place in the early summer heat, and dragging baggy canvas trousers with frayed half-moons rising over their heels, or checked houndstooth polyesters dark at seat and crotch, knees snagged out, pocket tops rolled and blackened. They pick carefully at the crumpled contents of covered refuse cans, ringed with wooden slats, gray-brown, weather-stained as their own hands and faces, to blend unobtrusively with the civil landscape. They work the streets, moving from can to can like the green beetles on a rose stalk, or the red ants that unfurl the peonies, moving methodically as the sun rises above the streets, climbs yellow in the high June sky. One pauses, pulls from the can a pint carton, drains the old milk into his thick, raw throat, and finds a discarded sandwich bun, its meat taken by a well-fed undergraduate with no desire for bread, no hunger for what's plain. This he eats, slowly, with the clumsy reverence of the often hungry, who make their morsels last, turning them slowly on thick tongues, pressing them through gaps among the teeth, against gums white and blistered from cheap leaf tobacco. He eats slowly, left hand still probing the can's full crop for other rewards, while another, seeing, rouses himself from the bench where he had already begun to doze in the sun, ambles sidelong toward the can, head lowered, dirty fingers clutching the insides of empty pockets, submissive and hopeful, and he watches as the first devours the bun, swallowing defiantly and baring sharp brown teeth against the intruder. I don't know if you suffer with the heat like I do. As soon as it gets to about 65, I begin to be uncomfortable. Needless to say, I didn't come from Nebraska. I have come to Nebraska. Where from? God's country. I'm from northern Wisconsin, as you'll find out later on in something I want to read for you. This is a shorter piece which comes from an image that I'd been toying around with for a long time, and I was never quite sure how it was going to turn out until one day in a department meeting I wrote this. It's called The Fisherman in the Ice. They found him beneath the ice, clear, smooth ice, bubbles and faults frozen in. First ice of this dry season unclouded by snow or honeycombing sun. The slow, hidden current of winter must have borne him in from the break, from the snapped-off rim of ice that failed beneath his weight, rolling slowly in the frigid water, woolen plaids wrapping him without warming, in his silent, ponderous turning, he must have slipped into this shallow where he lodged. Now, face upward, cry frozen in his gaping, blue-lipped mouth, eyes still wide, unclosed against the sun disclosing him, he speaks as from a tomb of glass. A sudden snow might hide him from their eyes, who will never forget him, who will have to talk of him, report him, there, staring, blind and frozen, like a nightmare suppressed, submerged, suspended in cold and living water. I'm told we all do dog poems. So, join the crowd, do a dog poem. This is no dog that I know, come to think of it, but it's a dog poem no less. It's called Old Dog. I'm very inventive about titles. What am I to do with you then? Half blind, nearly toothless, bony paws waggling in dream chase, you lie there, who cannot even walk some days when the arthritis swells your joints. And on those days, on those cold, gray November afternoons, those premature, mizzling March evenings, when I carry you nearer the fire, your eyes, your deep hazel eyes, speak something that is not pain. Your tail moves slowly. We grow old, my friend, you, my companion, my foreshadow. Is it misery to be so, to be stiff and still to dream, to run breathless miles now only in sleep, to be carried carefully like a full cup of tea, merely to feel the fire's warmth on your trembling flanks? Would you be out of this then? Would you be away, dead, gone who knows where, but leaving my stove side vacant, incomplete, your pillow put into the trash as though you had never lived, as though our eyes had never met before yours clouded blue, our needs never converged these empty winter nights? Do I love you somehow, or you me, or have we merely shared a time and space, a cabin with a fire, some little food? You have earned your warm place, your meals softened in my kitchen, spooned when you cannot lift your head. They are yours, and I should carry you always, burn this house to warm you. Do I owe you, at last, death? Is that dignity finally? I am your tormentor then, withholding what I might give outside with my knife, my gun. I shall try to make you easy in your grief, for I am selfish, both for myself now, watching you sleep, and for myself someday, some deep day, only remembering. Sleep, friend. I shall not be your death, though we share 1,000 winters at this fire. I gazing at your dark side, watching you breathe, losing you at every moment, grieving for us both, indistinguishable, while outside the soft snow falls in silence. Another dog poem, if you don't mind. This is a real dog, as you'll tell. My wife and I are great suckers for the dog pound and have brought home all manner of misbegotten creatures. This misbegotten creature is called Seika, spelled S-E-K-A, and any time anybody sees it, they immediately say Sika, although it's Seika. My wife was studying Russian at the time and says Seika is Russian for little sister. She's 90 pounds now. Seika. She's a big dog now, our black urchin, rescued, skinny and sick, from the wire cage in the pound where they kept and killed her litter mates. Put them to sleep, dying of distemper and despair and wasting, abandoned among the soiled newspapers, the strong and foul smell that catches in the throat. This one, of all of them, we saved. So we carried her home, shivering on your lap, oversized bony legs hanging astride your arm. Took her in installed her where her coughing kept us awake, and her wailing making up for the noise of the 5 she missed, asleep when she was not, dead as she was not, quite. And you gave her hot water bottles to lie on, and pumped her full of pills and potions till she stopped withering, stopped sloughing her insides, and began to have clear eyes. Even the vet marveled, who gave her up for lost, who spoke softly and stopped charging, seeing distemper lurking dark-eyed and hollow-chested within her trembling bony frame. That passed. She outgrew her collar, her cage, her shrieking in the night. Now she towers over the other 2, standing there eyeing your lunch. Oversized puppy in sleek black dress, dreaming of mud, of 5 black shadows, and of your sandwich. I should tell you a little bit about the background for this poem. I come, as I said, from northern Wisconsin, about 50 miles north of Green Bay, right on the Wisconsin-Michigan border. And my mother's side of the family ran a monument works. Several brothers, French brothers by the last name of Menor, ran this monument works up there, which from the early times they handled from start to finish. They imported the raw blocks of granite from various parts of the country and did all the cutting and finishing there in their own shops, and then did the lettering and set the stones out in the cemeteries and so forth. And when I was younger, I used to go along and, as a child, simply ride along, and then eventually I worked on part of these stone crews setting the monuments in little out-of-the-way backwoods cemeteries. So I've ended up with a rather heavy, rocky set of images that I'm dragging along with me. I never knew my mother's natural father. He had died long before I was born, and my grandmother had remarried. But I worked with the thought of him for quite a while and wrote a bunch of other poems about monuments and about all of that experience. And then this past year, again, mostly in a department meeting. Department meetings are good for some things. This began to take shape. It's called The Stone Man. I never knew him, this grandfather who stares off to the right from a single fading photograph, stiff, formal, prematurely balding like his son and his son's sons. The other side of the family, the stoneworkers. From the ravages of Verdun, he brought his strong French blood to his brother's granite works. In their sway-backed cutting shed, he sliced and shaped with them raw granite blocks with bandsaws, cold chisels, and the blood that darkened slabs that gouged and tore their flesh, that flattened fingers and shattered sturdy white ash dollies. He died of silicosis. Stonecutter's disease rendered him in stone. They worked the granite dry for want of costly water jets, lungs and blood and tissue stiffening with the stone dust they absorbed, the brothers breathing hard and deep of the clouds that shrouded them, that whitened beards and crusted over where they mixed with sweat and blood. In the heat of Wisconsin summers, they gasped for air, heaving the slabs through the thick and swirling haze of powdered mica, felspar, quartz. From barge to saw to polisher, fashioning monuments whose smooth and open faces gave them back their own, red and streaming. In the sharp, dry air of winter, they spat blood from lungs that rent and tore with every shallow breath. That March evening in 1937, he was reading when he coughed and bright blood flowed that could not be stanched. In a quarter hour, he had bled to death before his wife and children, and in 4 days was buried in earth his brothers softened with fires of broken timbers from the shop. They dug him up in 1941, exhumed him for insurance adjusters who still balked, disbelieving doctors' claims that men could turn to stone. The pried-off coffin lid disclosed him as he was in life, unchanged, gazing from a stony silence as he does now, looking off at something unseen outside the frame of this worn and browning image that haunts me from the wall. I'd like to read you a couple of poems that I wrote last fall. Last fall I had the opportunity to go off to Washington, D.C. for a couple of months to work at the National Gallery of Art. And I had the interesting experience of having an office in the new building of the National Gallery, which overlooked the mall, the D.C. Mall. In fact, the second day I was in my office, I had the very interesting experience of hearing a tremendous racket behind me outside, a bunch of sirens, and I thought, well, good, I'm an old ambulance chaser, see what's going on. Turned around and looked, and here's this enormous motorcade going down the street. And I suddenly realized what I was watching on the second day in my office was Mrs. Aquino being driven from the White House down to address Congress. Corazon Aquino, President of the Philippines. Interesting thing. And you see so much of that in Washington, but what particularly intrigued me was that then as this motorcade went on down the street, I looked out the window, and at the base of the window I could see straight down one floor to ground level. And not only had I looked, but 3 enormous rats had come out and were sort of gamboling around in the sunlight. And all of a sudden it was as though they intuitively knew I was looking at them, because they dove back into the bushes. Well, I discovered that Washington was in a lot of ways an unsettling place, but a great place for writing poetry. We didn't have department meetings there, unfortunately. What we did have was weekly lunches, at which one of the administrators of the National Gallery would talk to us, and talk to us, and talk to us. And I quickly discovered that it was useful to take a little pad along. So, what came out of the pad? Well, a couple of things. Let me read one of them to you. I stayed in the Adams-Morgan area of Washington, which was northwest from the center. And I took the subway home at night. And at that point, at the DuPont Circle exit where I got off, you come up probably 70 feet from underground. Very interesting situation, because the tube that you come up to the outside is a kind of oval tube, and as you come up the escalator, all you see is this patch of sky up above. A very interesting image. So a few images got together and decided to do this poem for me. It's called Beggar Girl at DuPont Circle. She looks 14, perhaps 15, posted at the mouth of the escalator that lifts us from the subway's concrete depths, from the stale and humid air toward the intense blue circle of a clear and endless sky. Her voice, pleading for small change, winds out, wavers in the air, like a lovely crested cobra, like the swaying painted head of a Renaissance serpent, sinuous, undulating, reaching from its tree, tempting with apples and smiles. It is a smallish face, white and thin, drawn down by straight, light hair. The eyes are pale and shallow, gray as an evening sky. The nails are plain, short and bitten, cracked and flecked with white where the fingertips turn up to take the coins. They stop for her, who pass all others without turning, put down parcels, grub in handbags, pockets. They clog the flow of commuters who pause to stare, shake heads, and fumble too for quarters. Some peel off bills even, while old men in dirty flannel shirts, discolored pants, and laceless shoes whose soles flap free look on with the eyes of wolves circling an unwary doe at sunset. Pockets lightened, consciences salved and troubled by the single act, the walkers pass these men whose graceless plea cannot compete. I turn and watch from a distance, hoping she is with them, that she will share what comes so much more easily to one who looks and sounds like her. When a dark, plum-colored car pulls up, she slips in quickly without a backward glance or word, as the looming men close on the lines that rise from underground toward a darkening sky portending gray and soaking rain. I think probably my greatest impression of Washington was just the incredible number of homeless people everywhere. I think one gets used to it when one has been to a place like New York, but somehow it's much more intense in Washington, perhaps because the city moves at a little slower pace and it's much quieter. I discovered, now I was there September, October, and November, and I discovered I could scarcely go 50 feet in any direction without encountering at least one panhandler. And as it got darker, you found people literally everywhere, sleeping in any available area. I had a very strange experience that comes out partly in this poem. It's called Sudden Snow. The weather has turned colder. Frost creeps in from the suburbs under cover of dark, finishing the gardens, blackening the late bloomers that started late, lagged all summer, and pay now in their incompletion the price of this cold-shortened season. The homeless begin to migrate from the parks and open spaces of September, sleeping crook-kneed and compact at night now in bus shelters, doorways, and windless alleys. In cardboard cartons they line with plastic and pad with leaves and straw, with cast-off blankets, sheets of newsprint bearing weather forecasts, football scores, the speeches of politicians at fundraising dinners. Squad cars roam the streets like mousers now, pause where sleepers crowd each other on benches and concrete footings. The police no longer rout them out, but merely shake the ones who seem inert, unmoving day to day, to find the dead, the drugged, the comatose. One, stretched prostrate beneath black plastic on the stiff brown grass of a circle park set back from the bronze and granite fountain, is slowly covered over, whitened by an unexpected snow that flurries for a bit, then dissipates off to the east, leaving a quickly melting wash of white to dissolve in little rivulets that follow the folds of the plastic sheet that hides this one, this stiff and sleeping one, whose home is all around and nowhere. Look at a garden poem. I can't grow cabbages in this climate, by the way. When we lived in Pennsylvania, it was the only blasted thing, cabbages and green beans. Taught at a small college in Pennsylvania. They owned a farm, and we could all go and have little plots. And of course, being greedy, we said, well, give us 2 plots. And a friend of ours said, yeah, give me 2 plots too. And she didn't plant hers, so now we've got 4 plots. All I did was put in 3 rows of green beans. I had no idea what the climate of Pennsylvania would do. I don't ever want to see a green bean again. Cabbages, likewise, grew wonderfully. Here, all I can grow is a nasty-looking little knot of a cabbage that gets eaten up by worms. So this poem got written when I was still in Pennsylvania. It's called not Dragon's Teeth, comma, but setting out the cabbages. Rows and rows of them in the red earth where they will feed and swell. I wonder why I do this sometimes, as if I need bushels of cabbages. Great, swollen, pregnant bellies, tight with yellow-green skin. They please me. Their growth soothes me in the sun, in the red field where the damp lingers under the spreading leaves. Down below, the roots suck the water and the heads grow big under sun and moon. I could put one by the azaleas, another among the petunias, a third by the porch. But here in row upon row, the great green-headed parliament will convene to celebrate the season. I may as well tell you a story about this next poem too while I'm at it. Just got back from northern Wisconsin, where I escaped the Nebraska heat for 2 weeks and got used to being able to breathe without having to blow my nose. We tend to buy the local papers up there just to see what's going on. And what's going on was kind of interesting. There was a news story about a tree that was cut down. And since, again, this is from my part of the country, the old logging country, I was sort of intrigued by this, and I decided to see what would become of it if I wrote about it. My poetry tends to be full of objects that I find all over the place. This one is a rather hefty object, but here it is. And since Wheeler Dixon and I were talking about cutting down trees before, let me read this one for Wheeler. It's called Virgin Pine. They took a white pine out today, south of Minocqua, that numbered the better part of 2 centuries in sharp, concentric, pungent rings. To widen the highway, the evening paper says, that already sprawls 3 lanes too wide to speed Chicago traffic to this clutch of tannin-rich clear lakes that give back beneath the late June sky the deep, clear blue of North Wisconsin skies. They told no one but the early shift from the paper mill office where it stood, who arrived at sunrise with Coleman stoves and speckled coffee pots and bacon to cook and talk about years past, to keep their private vigil away from tourist eyes and watch it topple slowly eastward in full shout in the windless, silent air at 6. This one survived, somehow, the ravage of axe and timber saw exactly 100 years ago, when the Yawkee's hungry mills denuded all this land, survived the bolt that shattered its crown, topped it in the deep of the Depression, outlasted trains whose brass-bound balloon stacks filled the winter air with wood smoke plumes, and later ones that passed their weak and unheroic days in blue and acrid clouds of diesel smoke, dragging the last near-empty, peeling coaches down the warping rails of a stricken Milwaukee road. As though captured in slow motion, like frame-by-frame photography, the great gray trunk heeled over, twisting slowly on its rooted base, and shook the ground, driving branches through the mulch of needle and birch leaf into gray and acid podzol soil. Only then would it disclose its rotted heart, the sweet and pulpy mass eating upward from the 5-foot stump. The picture in the paper sanitizes all, makes it all look simple, clean, unmoving. There's no caption for the sound it made, the twisting at the base, the dusty recoil from the earth, nor for the curious hole left up against the sky beside the highway, or the sudden absence of the soft and patient sighing through the boughs that were old already when Lincoln died in a stranger's bed amid the vigil watched in a windless, voiceless Washington. Let me read you 2 more poems, if I may. The first one seems to be right in season. It's called The July Robin. He stood there in the driveway when I turned in at 4, the young robin. We eyed one another, neither moving. He too young to know or fear, I guessed, until I got out, ushered him from the pavement that I might pass, marking him as I rolled by. It was exactly 100 degrees when I started the sprinkler. In 15 minutes the grass had darkened, had stiffened beneath the slanting icy spray come in good time. The birds arrived from all sides, gathering in the welcome cool. A gale of sparrows splashing like small children in the puddles that formed at the foot of the drive. High-voiced cardinals that love to perch up where the spray strikes them, sharp and full. Jays to drink greedily from the water troughs formed by brimming concrete section joints. Came too the robin, and I saw how he limped, lamed by some mischance and haloed by merciless flies that lit on his one side, and on the narrow head with its one clear inquiring eye, one drooping, sluggish lid, even as he made his way through the curtaining shower to rest himself, listing slightly in the grass beneath the young lilac. He took his comfort there, unaware, it seemed, of flies or hurt, his small, speckled body cooled by the water, eased some by the shelter, the shade, the supporting grass leaves. At 8, he was gone, when I stopped the water. I worried for him as the sky darkened, concerned about cats, about drivers in the evening who cared nothing for birds, about the swarming flies and their appalling iridescent drone. 2 days I wondered how he fared, and thought I heard him once in the junipers. I would not look, choosing to imagine, to hope, to respect that small and sheltered space that seemed to house the soft and easeful sound, to know this life must be his own, or not, as it fell out. This morning, I found beside the porch steps a single robin's wing resting on stiff grass from which the dew had not yet burned. Its pale gray-brown feathers delicate against the green here at the margin of the spreading juniper, the ratum of the Bible, tree of strong medicine. Its spindly new green fingers spread mutely, mantling this small sign. Perverse comfort to know. And then finally, let me do my coffee in here. Since this is, after all, the Heritage Room, and since I've come to have a fairly surprisingly strong feeling for this country, considering I've only been here about 8 years now, I'd like to read you a poem that I think is, in a way, what someone like me coming to this part of the country from a totally different part of the country, a totally different type of environment, this I think maybe reflects something of how I respond to this country. And I'd like to dedicate this to Hilda Raz, who's been a good friend and colleague and supporter in my time here. This is called Second Son. S-O-N. When the second son died, sweaty and delirious, shaking with fever from heat and bad water, they had to stop to bury him. The heat too great to bear him along. And so they worked, chopping through thick prairie sod with hickory-shafted axes, prying out great blocks of deep matted turf like outsized paving stones from the St. Louis streets that lay behind them, piling them carefully. Father, eldest son, youngest. These three toiling beneath the white and shadeless sky. The women, second three, sewing a winding sheet from their precious store of linen, thick and supple fabric from the old country, fabric of generations of feasts and celebrations, folded with care for this journey, this passing in the leather-strapped trunk, and brought out now to serve this one time more, to warm him and hold him in this strange land's bosom, to soil and stain in the acid black earth toward which the men dig through sod and sand, silent, their pained sweat streaming. They spare a board from the wagon side, forgetting in their grief that the south-facing side should best stay whole against the humid winds that rise, that sweep up from deep and ancient Anasazi lands where other sons lie buried in the air. The youngest son, too young to dig, hands bleeding from the effort beyond his strength, his years, bites his lip and brings blood, wincing in silence with the resinous fire of the oil he rubs into the cut board as he smooths it slowly with his less than man's hands. They will fashion it into a rough cross, scored with his name, with their love. Rub carbon from the lantern chimney into the grooves, wax them to seal his name, so neither wind nor sun can steal it. Face it eastward to catch the morning sun in early spring before the prairie grass engulfs it, as now the soil engulfs the white-wrapped boy, as now the blocks of sod safeguard against animals, conceal the dark earth they cover once again, as now the distance steals it from their view while they move away, westward, silent. Too little food, too little time, the land too vast to grant them rest, nor more than these few prayers, these silent tears, this cross smoothed with oil and blood, that will perish in the August prairie fire, that will cleanse this land, refresh it, to bring forth new life. Thank you.